From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. President Biden delivered a message of unity and working together to meet the challenges we face in his inaugural address just yesterday. But now he has to turn those encouraging words into some concrete actions that Republicans as well as Democrats can support. For an early take on the prospects and where he should start, we welcome now Republican Congressman James Comer of Kentucky. He's the ranking member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee. So, Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. As a Republican, what would you like to hear from the brand new Biden administration that would convince you, yes, they really do want to bring people together and move together rather than on a strictly partisan basis?
Well, I was excited to hear his remarks yesterday when he talked about unifying America and working with Republicans, but then he walked across the street and started doing those executive orders, which totally undid everything that Republicans stand for and everything that Republicans believe in without any committee hearings, without sitting down and talking to Republicans. So I think he got off to a bad start, but moving forward, if he really wants to unify, let's pick issues where Republicans and Democrats do agree. We do agree that we need to create jobs and improve our economy. We do agree that we need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure in America, and we do agree that we need to make sure that the vaccine gets distributed efficiently and effectively as possible to every American who wants the vaccine. So those are the issues that will unify Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and those are the issues I encourage President Biden to start with.
So if we take those in reverse order, talk with the vaccination and dealing with the COVID-19 right now, we're going to hear from President Biden later on this afternoon with his new plan. Is there more that Congress can do right now to support the new administration with respect to vaccinations, getting them out there? Because it seems like we're not making the progress we would like to.
Well, I think that the administration needs to be transparent with Congress. It probably was a breakdown of communication over the last few weeks between the Trump administration and Congress with respect to where we are currently with the vaccine distribution and where we're going to be over the next 3 to 4 weeks with vaccine distribution. So now that Biden has taken office and put his team in, I think that he can be transparent with Congress because we want to help. If the administration needs money, we will appropriate the money. We want to do what we can to make sure that everyone is vaccinated and that we can get our economy reopened and we can get life back to normal.
So that's one place you might be able to work together on the vaccination and fighting this COVID-19. Talk about jobs, take them again in reverse order. You mentioned jobs, the need to really create jobs. What can Congress do to help the president generate jobs? That's part of what he's saying he needs to do with the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, right?
Right. But we have to remember that Congress has already passed 2 enormous stimulus bills. The biggest factor in holding our economy back right now, quite honestly, are Democrat governors and Democrat mayors who continue to keep our economy shut down, who continue to have excessive restrictions on private business. Every big employer in my congressional district in Kentucky tells me they're trying to hire people. But then I turn the news on and I hear about the massive unemployment rate, not just in Kentucky, but all across America. So there's a divide between what our employers and what the leaders in the private sector feel like the economy has the potential to do and what the economy is actually doing. So I think if we can start by reopening the economy, and obviously we want to do that in a safe manner, so the COVID vaccine distribution will play a huge role in that. But we also have to look at what holds our economy back, and that's excessive regulation. So when Joe Biden starts with canceling the Keystone pipeline, when he talks about rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, these are issues that spook the private sector. These are issues that we feel hold the private sector back. I think we can have common sense regulations, and I think we can, in a bipartisan way, have an economy that addresses climate change without having burdensome regulations on the private sector.
Congressman, we heard from Janet Yellen, the nominee for the Treasury Secretary, earlier this week, testifying over on the other side at Capitol Hill in the Senate. And she said, unless we take some further action here, and she was trying to support the $1.9 trillion bill, unless we take some further action, we're going to have a painful and extended recession. Do you agree with her? Are we headed potentially for another recession if we don't have even more stimulus? And you pointed out there's always been a fair amount.
I honestly worry more about inflation than a recession because the government has printed a lot of money over the last 12 months. And I think we need to step back and again hear from our job creators. The private sector is where jobs are created. And the private sector is very dissatisfied with the direction that Washington has taken over the last few months. So we need to make sure again that every regulatory obstacle that can be relaxed is relaxed, and we need to focus on trying to get people back to work. I do believe there are a large percentage of Americans who have not really felt the effects of previous stimulus bills. That's why I supported President Trump's efforts and many Democrat efforts to do the direct payments to individuals. I think that's something that would get money into the pockets of the American people to stimulate the economy. But certainly when you talk about stimulating the economy and creating jobs, we need to look at, if we're going to spend money, what do we need in America? And we need to invest in our crumbling infrastructure. And I believe a major infrastructure bill would probably be the best investment for the taxpayers and the best prescription to get our economy back on track.
So let's conclude this on infrastructure, because that's the second time you've mentioned it now. Are you, as a Republican, willing to entertain a fairly large infrastructure package out of this president? He said he wants to get to that as part of his Build Back Better program.
I would rather invest in infrastructure than continue to create new bureaucracies and social programs and increase welfare. So we have to invest in our crumbling infrastructure in America, and we need to do that efficiently. Some of the proposals that I've heard, some of the extreme left wing of the Democrat Party talk about with respect to making it Green New Deal approved, I think that adds unnecessary cost to infrastructure projects. I think we can come together on the need to invest a significant amount of money in our infrastructure if we do it efficiently. And we have to remember the taxpayers have been straddled with a ridiculous budget debt over the last decade, and we cannot continue to go down the path of spending trillions more every year than we take in.
Okay, Congressman, thank you very much for your time today. That is Republican Representative James Comer of the state of Kentucky. Let's check now on the markets, and for that we turn to Kayla Line. So he had a really good first day, President Biden did. Second day, and not quite so good.
Yeah, it's losing a little bit of steam after greeting Joe Biden yesterday with record highs. The best post-inauguration first-day performance for the S&P 500 since at least 1937. Today, though, the index is basically flat. And what's interesting, David, is when you look at the reflation trade, you are seeing yields moving higher, 1.1% on the 10-year note once again, and the dollar is weakening. But that reflation trade isn't showing up in the equity market. The Russell 2000 is actually down about 0.8% in today's session, while it is big tech that is outperforming. The NASDAQ 100 up about half of 1%. And if you lift the lid on the S&P 500, it's actually most sectors that are in the red. The only sectors that are in positive territory today are big tech, consumer discretionary, which is, of course, mostly Amazon, communication services, which holds the likes of Alphabet and Facebook, and then, of course, information technology. Those are the only stocks really contributing in a positive way to the index at this point. So, David, that doesn't signal much faith in this session in the reflation trade, but we do have to note we are still in earnings season. A lot of those value cyclical sectors aren't going to be doing as well in their quarterly reports. A lot of that growth is going to be coming from tech, so investors may be taking that into account. And then you also have to consider that reflation trade ran very far, very fast, evidenced by those record highs we saw yesterday. So that may be unwinding just a touch in this Thursday session, David.
Kaylee, thank you so much for that report on the markets. That's Kaylee Lyons. We're going to talk a little about that reflation trade in just a moment. We're going to go over what President Biden can and must do for the U.S. economy with Nathan Sheets. He's PGIM Fixed Income Chief Economist. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Over the next few months, we're going to need more aid. Neither the president-elect nor I proposed this relief package without an appreciation for the country's debt burden. But right now, with interest rates at historic lows, the smartest thing we can do is act big. In the long run, I believe the benefits will far outweigh the costs.
That was Treasury Secretary nominee Janet Yellen testifying at her confirmation hearing earlier this week. President Biden has made a priority out of getting further stimulus through the Congress. In fact, he said it's his day one priority to support the economy as well as households as he ramps up his battle with the coronavirus. To take us through where the economy is and where it is headed, we welcome now Nathan Sheets. He's PGIM fixed income chief economist. Mr. Sheets has earlier served in senior positions in both the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department. Nathan, always great to have you with us. Is Janet Yellen right that we're headed for some pretty rocky times if we don't have even further stimulus? Because we've had a lot already.
I think Janet Yellen is absolutely right on this. I think that additional fiscal stimulus is the safest course for the economy and for policy. The reality is that at the moment, the economy is feeling powerful headwinds associated with this virus. You know, of course, as the year progresses and the vaccine is disseminated, my expectation is that that's going to kick off a strong recovery, that there's a lot of saving in the household sector that is waiting to be spent as we move back toward normal. But the challenge is getting from where we are today to the second half of the year when we're experiencing those favorable tailwinds.
Nathan, should we be concerned at all about overshooting that? As you say, we have to get past this pandemic, which is a big, tall order of business. At the same time, is there any danger at all in goosing the economy enough to get us to that point that it'll actually be overheated once it bounces back?
The good news is that if we get to the point where the economy is so strong that it's overheating, that the Federal Reserve knows how to respond to that. If we get to a place where growth is rapid and it looks like inflation has moved up in a prolonged and sustainable way, first of all, that's going to make the Fed very happy. And secondly, that will be a signal that maybe the economy over the medium term is going to be in a stronger place than it was before the pandemic. So the possibility of overheating, I think, is ironically good news for the medium-term outlook.
Nathan, we hear a lot from the Republican side about targeting the stimulus. It has to be more targeted. Is there a risk, as an economist, is there a risk in having this too broad base? Because let's be honest, in that $1.9 trillion, there are some things that at least I have a tough time syncing up with the fight against the COVID-19. For example, the federal minimum wage.
So I think the key objective is to get additional income into the spending stream. So what you want to do is you want to move income from government borrowing into the hands of households, firms, and state and local governments that we expect are going to spend it. Now, to the extent that it is targeted, say, particularly toward unemployed households, I think that that is first best. And it is appropriate for us to have a discussion about targeting. But we shouldn't let the reality that it's going to be hard to target it perfectly stand in the way of us providing the stimulus that the economy needs.
Nathan, just briefly here at the end, a lot of them aren't spending it, though, right? They're saving it instead because a lot of people just can't go out and spend it on anything. Isn't that a problem?
So the money that households and businesses receive can be spent through or utilized three ways. One is it can be spent today, which provides support into the vaccine. Second, it be saved and spent later, which means we have a stronger recovery. Or third, it's used to pay down debt, which means that balance sheets in the economy are cleaner and stronger and more able to support growth in the future. So my feeling is through this period, pretty much any utilization of those resources is constructive for the outlook.
So let me take you as an economist and sentence you to being in our Congress. Would you vote for the $1.9 trillion bill if it were before you today?
I would vote for the $1.9 trillion if in the process of it being negotiated, The number declined to something around 1 trillion. I would say that I would also vote for something like that. But
Yeah.
I think it should be at least $1 trillion.
You'd be a good congressman. You can negotiate right off the top of your head. Thank you so much, Nathan. Always great to have you with us. That's Nathan Sheets. He is chief economist at PGIM Fixed Income. Coming up, we hear from former Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker on what the Biden administration will mean for U.S. business. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Just before President Biden took that oath of office yesterday, we talked with one of his key advisors, Penny Pritzker. Penny Pritzker is now founder of PSP Partners, but she also is the former Secretary of Commerce that was under President Obama. We asked Ms. Pritzker, should American business really be concerned about a Biden administration? What, in the end, should American business expect out of President Biden?
This is a terrific time because we're bringing back certainty and stability to government and integrity and decency. And I think that's the first thing that's most important is that we're going to begin to work again where facts and science are going to be driving our decision making, and we're not going to be responding to tweets, if you will, that are not based in reality. So I think that's, I've talked to hundreds of business people, and that's what they're focused on. They want more certainty, more stability. It's hard to plan hard enough to plan given the virus and given the situations that we're facing. We need more reliability out of our government and knowing what to expect from them.
So there are some things that the president can do on his own, some he needs Congress's help on. Congress, he has a very, very slim majority. We'll see what he can do. But when it comes to president on his own, we have some executive orders that are coming out right at the top. For example, the XL pipeline, and some things really involving the environment and things. Do we expect a lot more regulation out of the Biden administration when it comes to the environment?
Look, I think that addressing climate change has been one of the top 4 priorities. First, the virus. Second, the economy. Third, racial inequality. And fourth, climate change are the 4 major priorities of the Biden administration. And I think that you'll see, I think the courts yesterday just turned back some of the regulations or that Trump was trying to roll back, if you will. Look, President-elect Biden, and when he's president, is looking to make sure that we're leading in terms of green energy and clean energy, that we're leading in terms of electric vehicles, that we're leading in terms of the technologies of the future. And I think that the regulatory picture will be encouraging that, as opposed to something that's just trying to create regulation for regulation's standpoint.
At the same time, could it curtail growth, do you think?
No. I think that focus on climate and clean energy and electric vehicles, et cetera, is about leading for the future. You're seeing demand for that. Look at the valuations of the companies, the car companies that are leading in electric vehicles. The market is telling us this is where they want to go. The consumer is telling us this is what I want. And so I think this is about leading as opposed to fighting to preserve our totally fossil fuel based economy. That is, we're going to have a hybrid economy in that respect. We've got to continue to move for the sake of our planet towards cleaner and cleaner energy consumption and a better climate policy.
One of the things that we are anticipating is that there will be more requirements for disclosure by corporations on things like the effect on the environment and other issues involving what is typically talked about as environmental, social, and governance, ESG sorts of issues. Do you think that will actually change investment patterns? As an investor, as a shrewd businesswoman, do you think it would change investment patterns?
I think investment patterns are changing. You know, my experience in my own corporate life, both on boards and in businesses we own, is our workforce is demanding that we change the way we do business. Our stakeholders are demanding that we change the way we do business, that we're more sensitive in terms of the way we do governance, that we're more sensitive to sustainability, that we set goals for ourselves around diversity so that we are able to behave to a set of standards that are living up to the values that are everyone involved in a business, whether it's your employee base, your customer base, your supply chain demands of you. So I think that actually the marketplace is driving this, and frankly, the government is catching up.
One of the things that we heard in Janet Yellen's testimony for her confirmation was a lot of questions about taxation, particularly coming from the Republican side. And of course, President-elect Biden, when he was running, and he will be president, had a lot of proposals on taxation. How nervous is American business about increased taxes?
I think that American business is focused right now on the solving the crisis, the virus crisis, that we need to get everyone vaccinated, and that we need to make that a transparent and reliable process, which I have every confidence that the team that President-elect Biden has put together will be able to do. I think number two, they recognize we've got to help small and medium-sized businesses. We've got to get the service industries back in order, and I think and functioning, and get people traveling again. That's such an important part of our economy. And then I think there will be a focus on infrastructure. So I think the issue of taxes is not front and center right now. I think what's on the mind of American business is really we need to get over the hump and over the hurdle of conquering this virus. We do have the science in hand. The question is now, how do we've got to get the distribution of vaccines and the execution done, which we will. The faster, the better, the clearer it is in terms of month to month who can get vaccinated and how fast is really, I think, essential for confidence building and for decision making for most corporate leaders so that they can plan. I think then really the government needs to attend to infrastructure, R&D spend, skilling. That's as I understand, the second priority for this administration.
That was part of my interview with former U.S. Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker. Coming up, the path out of our current economic crisis with someone who helped deal with the last one back in 2008. She's former FDIC Chair Sheila Bair joining us next. And then later in the program, we're going to be joined by the chair of the Biden Inauguration Committee, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina. He's the third-ranking Democrat in the House and the man whose key endorsement helped President Biden win the nomination of his party when he endorsed him just before the South Carolina primary. That's all coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. In his first full day in office, President Joe Biden is taking aim at the coronavirus. He'll be rapidly reversing or refashioning many of President Trump's most criticized policies. President Biden will use executive orders to overhaul the approach to virus testing. He'll also stabilize the supply chain for critical medical supplies and improve the government's ability to provide fast and fair vaccine distribution. World leaders are breathing a sigh of relief that the United States under President Biden is rejoining the global effort to curb climate change. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and French President Emmanuel Macron were among those welcoming Mr. Biden's decision to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, reversing a key Trump policy in the first hours of his presidency. Mr. Johnson called it, quote, hugely positive news. Donald Trump's second impeachment trial remains in limbo. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is holding off on triggering a proceeding that could slow the newly Democratic-controlled Senate in confirming key Biden administration officials. Speaker Pelosi declined to give a specific timeline to reporters at a news conference, but said the House impeachment managers are talking with senators about when to begin a trial.
We had to wait for the Senate to be in session. They've now informed us they're ready to receive. The question is, are there questions about how a trial will proceed? But we are ready.
The Speaker added that the House will be ready to pass President Biden's relief package in February. There will be at least one holdover from the Trump administration. Bloomberg has learned Christopher Wray is expected to stay on as director of the FBI with 6 years left in his term. President Trump had considered firing Wray at various points in his term over numerous issues, including the former president's frustration that U.S. law enforcement officials wouldn't provide politically damaging information on Joe Biden's family. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. Janet Yellen this week testified in her confirmation hearing that the economy needs another round of major stimulus to avoid an extended and painful recession. This comes on top of several $1 trillion in stimulus already enacted and just over 10 years since the last financial crisis required monetary and fiscal intervention. Sheila Bair was one of those charged with getting us out of the great financial crisis when she served as chair of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And welcome her now back to Bloomberg. So, Sheila, thank you so much for being with us. As you look at it and heard what Janet Yellen had to say, she said, Janet Yellen, President Biden and I are very aware of how much debt we have. We're very cognizant of that. But at the same time, we can't afford not to do that. What's your take on it?
Well, I think she's right. You need to go big right now. The economy is still in serious trouble. And once again, the people are getting hit the hardest are low income, low middle income families, and the lion's share of the assistance. You've got supplemental unemployment, you've got direct household payments. I think that's money well targeted and needs to be spent. Families need help; they're still struggling, and so I agree with her.
Targeting. We talk about targeting a lot. The Republicans talk about it.
Right.
We never seem to quite get there. I mean, as a practical matter, even with the PPE and things like that, it appears that it's going to the top, not the bottom. What can we do better to make sure it does get to the people who need it?
Well, I think the shift to fiscal away from monetary policy is hugely important. Notably, this $1.9 trillion does not include additional money to, backstop the Fed with its interventions. The Fed's just not equipped to get money to Main Street. They put money into financial markets. Wall Street's been doing really, really well since the great financial crisis. Not so much for that lower 80%, really. The people who work for a living and rely on labor income, not investment income, to live. So just shifting back to fiscal, that's a much better approach to get money actually in the hands of families. And, direct payments is a very efficient way to get money out quickly, which is really what we need to do. You don't need a lot of bureaucracy. There's there's all this debate about whether people earn it or not or deserve it. I look at all the trades that have gone to Wall Street and I kind of have disdain for that. The lower 80% of the population, which is where these payments will reach, they've not done so well, right? It took them 10 years to recover. They were finally just catching up, and we have this hit. So I think there's some inequities of the past being addressed with these payments as well. But at least we know where the money's going. It's going to households. They can spend it on consumption. They can pay rent. They can pay their bills. They can save some of it. They can buttress their emergency savings. Again, I think that's money well spent.
So one of the things that this pandemic has really exposed is some of the racial and economic injustice across the country. The Black communities and the Hispanic communities, and for that matter, the Native American communities have really been particularly hard hit. Is there anything that either the Fed or the Congress can do to really readjust that, to really target the assistance for the people that really need it? That is to say, the minority communities.
Yeah. So there's a lot of structural bias in our system. We need to, fundamentally rethink policy. So the way, for instance, banking, my neck of the woods, the way we think about risk and risk weight, bank capital requirements, there's a lot of racial bias built into the assumptions that we use. So I think that's another area where I hope Janet Yellen will take a fresh look. I hope the Fed and other bank regulators will take a fresh look, how we think about credit, I think there's a lot of systemic bias. And there's one example of where policy generally can have, things that we're not even aware of, should be aware of, but have not been. So that, in addition to then just focusing on low income families where unfortunately minorities are disproportionately represented, I fear we're going to have we're going to be worsening our structural unemployment problem. Labor force participation is down again. Job retraining, job growth, wage growth, job retraining. I'm for, some kind of universal basic income too, to provide some type of, base support for working families. When we get through cycles like this, they've got something automatically to fall back on. There are a whole host of things. Let's face it, working families have been ignored by both parties for way too long. And so I'm hoping that Mr. Biden and Janet Yellen and others of his team are really going to be refocused on this, and I think they are.
Sheila, one of the things that you focused on during the great financial crisis was really the safety and security of our financial system. Right. As we go through this crisis and you look from the outside now, do you see places that you're concerned about the financial system?
I do. I think the unbanked sector, the non-bank sector is a continuing source of turmoil. And last March, we had market disruptions. Same suspects, right? Money market funds, highly leveraged hedge funds, levered corporate ETFs. The Fed, again, had to come in and provide a lot of liquidity, a lot of bailouts. Whether that was right or not, I don't know. I do know that when we resort to bailouts as opposed to using regulation to prevent these unstable structures to begin with, we just reinforce risky, bad behavior. So we need to fish or cut bait. Stop the bailouts, let them go down, let the market punish them, do away with them, or start providing some meaningful prudential supervision to prevent these unstable structures from proliferating. Maybe some combination of both, but the unbanked sector, non-bank sector is definitely an area of continued financial fragility. And I think, again, Janet Yellen, as chair of the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which has the authority, the cross-cutting regulatory authority to deal with this, I hope will be a high priority for her as well.
So during the great financial crisis, I keep going back to, we talked about being too big to fail as a bank. When you talk about money market funds, they may not be too big, but might they be too vital to the ongoing success of the financial system? Can you really allow them to fail given their central role in the system?
Well, look, I think there are a lot of different ways that financial institutions can fund themselves that are not as volatile as short-term, as these highly short-term fundings. There's still too much reliance on short-term funding. I look at more from the investor and customer perspective. I think money market funds that look, if money market funds want to hold themselves out, and let's face it, they still do. Your principal's protected, is money good, just the way it is in a bank. Then they need some kind of bank-like regulations to require them to hold capital against that implicit guarantee, or make them invest in things where the principal is really protected, like short-term government securities. The funds that invested in federal securities did fine. It was the prime funds that invest in more volatile assets where we had problems. So, no, I think there is a solution other than serial bailouts of money market funds. And again, if they want to have this implicit guarantee, put some of your own money behind it.
It's very helpful. Really appreciate it always when you're with us. That is former FDIC Chair Sheila Bair. Coming up, Union Pacific records its most efficient quarter ever despite the ongoing pandemic. We'll discuss how with Lance Fritz. He is Union Pacific CEO. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. A key indicator of how the economy overall is doing is shipping, and in particular, shipping by rail. Union Pacific is the second largest railroad system in the country, covering over 32,000 miles in 23 states. It announced its earnings for the fourth quarter and for the year earlier today, and we welcome now its chairman and CEO. He is Mr. Lance Fritz. So great to have you back with us. Really appreciate it. You had a really good fourth quarter. Tell us why.
Yeah, it's because the women and men of Union Pacific persevered through a really difficult year. The things that went right in the fourth quarter were strong productivity, $170 million for the quarter, $780 million for the year, 3% growth, and we translated that effectively into bottom line, where operating income went up 9% and EPS was up strong about 17%. So, but overall, a very good quarter.
So how much of it was the market? And by that, I mean, I guess, how many people wanted to ship things, and how much of it was within your company? Particularly, I know you pride yourself in your efficiency.
Yeah, all of it ultimately had to be earned, whether it's through a good service product, reliable and consistent, safety, addressing the ESG concerns of our customers, or being relentless on business development. But the markets that were very helpful, e-commerce, which supports our domestic intermodal product, the automotive industry continued to recover. Plastics were pretty sound. Grain, as you know, was very strong in the quarter. There were still some headwinds. The industrial economy continued to improve quarter to quarter sequentially, but it's still not growing year over year.
How much visibility do you have into 2021 at this point?
It's still a little opaque to us. What we've told our owners is that we think the year is going to generate 4 to 6% volume growth. Now, I could make a series of assumptions that make that much stronger, but I also could paint a picture where the pandemic really doesn't get behind us and consumers start losing confidence. So right now, we think the middle of the fairway for us is about 4 to 6% growth. We think grain continues to be pretty strong story, certainly in the first half. We think this conversion to e-commerce continues and doesn't necessarily ebb entirely. We think housing continues to recover. The automotive industry continues to recover. And ultimately, we need to see the industrial economy start coming back stronger than it has.
So coal, I know, is a significant, not a huge, but a significant part of your shipment. We have a Biden administration coming in right now. It doesn't look like they're going to be terribly friendly to coal, at least at the moment. That's me editorializing, but that's just my guess. What does it mean if you actually are shipping less coal? Does that affect your business?
Yeah, David, that transition away from coal into other fuels to generate electricity in the United States has been underway for a long, long time. In part, that's helpful to us. We have a book of business that supports the shipment of wind turbines, and that's an attractive little book of business. But coal's a big, big deal to us. It's been about 9 or 10% of our volume last year, and we anticipate it's on a long-term secular decline. Almost regardless of which administration's in power, local communities are very interested in moving away from coal and converting to other forms of electricity generation.
Well, what about your competition with trucking? Because I know that emissions and fuel efficiency are going to be very important to this administration. Do you have an advantage? Do you anticipate maybe there'll be some shifting toward rail and away from trucking because of environmental concerns?
I am so pleased you asked that question. We are core to our customers' ability to reduce their carbon footprint when they convert from truck to us. So yes, we definitely play a big role there. It's part of the conversation in our business development with many of our customers and is becoming a more important part. So as we reduce fuel consumption like we did in the fourth quarter and last year, we had something like a 2 to 3% improvement. That's helpful, as is us just generally being more productive and efficient and having an increased car velocity. All of that leads to a smaller carbon footprint for us and translates directly into helping our customers achieve their goals.
Okay, really appreciate it every time you come on, and congratulations on your great fourth quarter there. That's Union Pacific CEO and Chairman. He is Mr. Lance Fritz. Coming up, where does the House stand on impeachment proceedings? We posed that question to Congressman James Clyburn, Democrat of South Carolina and House Majority Whip. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Jim Clyburn's endorsement of President Biden before the South Carolina primary was key to his winning the nomination and ultimately the presidency. He is the third-ranking member of the Democratic leadership in the House, and yesterday he presided over the inauguration as the chair of the Inauguration Committee. We welcome Congressman Clyburn now back to Bloomberg. So, Mr. Clyburn, thank you so much for being with us. First of all, congratulations on what I think everyone thinks was a very successful inauguration. I really am taken back, though. I remember your endorsement speech in South Carolina, and you're talking about your wife, sadly departed now wife, and her relationship with President Biden. It must have been on your mind what she would have thought if she could have been there with you.
Oh, absolutely. I thought about Emily quite a bit on yesterday. We've got three daughters, and the middle daughter was with me all day yesterday, and we talked a lot about how her mother would have enjoyed seeing that day come, because Dr. Biden was also a pretty good friend with Emily, and Dr. Biden spoke at an event we had virtually last week about her interactions with Emily, and I'll tell you, I think she would really have been beside herself experiencing that yesterday.
So, as I say, the accounts I've seen from all sorts of the spectrum really say that it was a very successful inauguration. But let's be honest, that just sort of sets the stage for what comes next. A lot of really great language, a lot of talk about unity and working across the aisle. Now the question is what you do about that. What's the first thing that you would like President Biden to do to really reach across the aisle and prove to Republicans as well that he really means what he says?
Well, I think those executive orders that he signed on yesterday, signed in 10 more today, dealing with COVID-19, the various aspects of it. He is now doing things that the select committee that I chair on COVID-19 has been calling upon the administration to do for a year now. And so to see these executive orders and where he's going with using the Defense Production Act, using FEMA, using the national card to get testing done, get distribution done, is a great relief. So I think he's demonstrating that he's serious about tackling this issue and getting it behind us. But in addition to that, I think he must continue to sign executive orders if the recalcitrants continue over in the Senate. Now, there's a new Senate now. The majority has shifted, though it's a very close majority, only a one vote, basically a tie vote with the vice president breaking the tie. So it's going to be very dicey, but it doesn't have to be 50-50 all the time. It ought to be bipartisan, and I hope that we can get there.
Well, let's talk about the thing that's the biggest one, the first one up, which is that $1.9 trillion proposal out of President Biden on stimulus. We've already had some Republicans, including some moderate Republicans, such as Mitt Romney, saying, I've got some real doubts about that. Are there ways that you can see, you're such a skilled legislator, are there ways that you can see that you could bring at least some Republicans along with some version of that bill?
Oh, absolutely. I think that we have to have these discussions. The president proposes, the Congress disposes, and we are going to have real serious discussions as to what to do. And I think the first thing we have to recognize that this is a rescue plan, not a stimulus plan at all. We're trying to rescue people's lives. They need to be paying their mortgages. And when you start talking about paying their mortgages, it's not just not for people to stay in their homes, it's also for the people who own those mortgages to also get the relief that they need in order to keep housing available. So we got to have these discussions. And now my Republican friends need to look at this in the totality of what they are, not just one end of it. And see, a lot of people tend not to see how these things affect everybody. It's not just the occupant of the home, it's the owner of the property as well.
When you talk about the totality of what's going on up on Capitol Hill right now includes also an article of impeachment that, as I understand it, is sitting on the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's desk right now. As I say, you're one of the most senior members of leadership. What's holding that up? What is the strategy being thought about when it's put forward? I know at one point you suggested maybe it should just be held for a while to get the stimulus through and then turn to the question.
Well, when I look at the way they did it the last time, they had those hearings for the trial basically in the afternoons. And we may have to have longer days. So the Senate can devote its morning to helping get all these nominations done and confirmed so that we can have government functioning properly. They may need to have some evening sessions to get legislation done so that we can continue to move forward. So I think we can do more than one thing. devote the mornings to something, the afternoon to something else, and the evenings to even something else again if that becomes necessary.
So does that suggest you don't see any particular reason why Speaker Pelosi should hold on to it and not send it over right away? Should we expect in the next few days?
Well, it means it's simply that she and the leadership of the Senate, I hope, are having discussions as to how to effectively get this done. Look, the country is teetering. We just saw the effects of what happens when the country is not clicking on all cylinders. We got to get the legislative, the executive together so that we can move this country forward. And that's what we have to do. So hopefully the Speaker and both leaders over in the Senate are talking about how the best to move this agenda forward.
So finally, Congressman, there was apparently a moment of bipartisanship yesterday between you and the former President George W. Bush when he said you were the savior. Tell us about that. What did you take him as meaning?
Well, George W. Bush and I are pretty friendly. When he was president, we joshed around a lot. And I sort of broke the ice on yesterday because he had a very colorful comment to make 4 years ago after the inaugural speech. And so when we greeted each other with our elbow bumps, I looked at him, I said, well, hopefully we don't have a strange speech here today, though he said it in more colorful language 4 years ago. Yeah, and so that started the conversation. Yeah. And then he turned to me, he said, you do know that you were the savior. Yeah, so well. And he was talking about the primary. Yep. He told me that he thought.
Congressman Clyburn, thank you so very much. This is Bloomberg.